Hi there, Stage 2. We're back with another reading of Surviving Sydney Cove, the diary of Elizabeth Harvey. Let's get started. Wednesday, 21st of April. All my bathing was undone this morning when old Tom asked me to rake out the pig pen. Because old Tom knows our papa was a farmer, he likes me to help with country tasks. Raking away stinky pig droppings is not to my liking, and I loudly sent all pigs to the devil. A large black and pink sow glared evilly back. To add to my dislike, old Tom told me Governor Phillip had planned to send those very pigs into the bush to increase their numbers. I paused in my raking. Why didn't he? Tom's one good eye winked at me. Wouldn't those darned Indians eat everyone? I've been waiting for him to tell me that someone had stolen 2 onions. So far he has said nothing. Perchance he has decided to forget them. Midday, Sarah and I settled down to scraps of salt meat stewed with turnip tops when Uriah Small came to tell me to go to the barracks. Uriah lives in one of the family huts with his mother and brother. Hair spills over his eyes so he can hardly see, and his face is covered in grime. When I asked him who was calling for me, he said, "Surgeon asks to talk with you," and took off down the muddy track that leads to the barracks. I settled my cap, wrapped myself in a shawl, and hurried to catch up. Many surgeons sailed with us from Portsmouth, I said to him. Which one is it? He mumbled something under his breath and raced ahead. When we got to the barracks, he ran inside. I was too scared to follow. Has not Sarah always warned me to stay away from where men gather? I drew figures in the dust with my toes. Soon, a man emerged from the barracks. He came over to where I stood, and I recognized him as the papa of the child I had rescued. Tall and with a military bearing. I think that he must have been quite stout because his jacket hung on him like a scarecrow's. His complexion was leathery from too much sun, his red hair flecked with grey, his eyes steel with blue, and his square chin covered in reddish stubble. I bobbed a curtsy and waited for him to speak. He looked me up and down. "Are you the convict, Elizabeth Harvey?" "Yes, sir," I said. How did he know my name? The gentleman chewed his lower lip a while. "Do you know who I am?" "No, sir," I shook my head. Then it came to me in a rush. Those onions! Wretched Winston Russell must have confessed. I was as good as dead. Strong men could barely survive 100 lashes, much less someone as small and weak as I am. He said, "Surgeon James Russell, at your service." Winston Russell's father! Again, I nearly fainted, only this time with relief. The surgeon was saying, "Wish to thank you on 2 counts. Firstly, for saving my daughter." He shuddered slightly. "This last year in Port Jackson, already 2 small girls have been attacked." I pulled myself together. Someone must defend poor Sam, or for certain he would be flogged. "Sam is stupid," I cried. "That is why he is called Simple Sam. But there is no harm in him. He was only trying to help the little girl back onto her feet." "Possibly you are right," but his shrug was unconvinced. "As for that other business with my son..." He cleared his throat behind his hand. "Best if that's quickly forgotten." Just then, the little girl limped out from the barracks. Now she was no longer crying. I could see that she was as pale-skinned as her father and brother. But where they have gingery hair, hers is almost white. She has pale grey eyes and the most dainty arms and legs I have ever seen. She is so delicate, she reminded me of a china figurine. "This is Emily," her father told me. "As you can see, she has a badly sprained ankle." I glanced down. Sure enough, a rag was tightly wrapped around her leg. Her papa said, "My children lost their mother at sea. Now I must be both mother and father to them." He stood back to consider me. "Where are your parents?" My eyes filled with tears. "Sir, all I have in the world is one brother, and I was forced to leave him in Cranham." "Cranham," he mused. Where might that be? Sir, the Cotswolds in the west of England. Dearest Edward, as soon as this came out of my mouth, I had a sudden vision of soft green hills and misty rain. Homesickness leaves an ache in my stomach that I am sure no surgeon, no matter how clever he might be, can ever cure. The surgeon said, Elizabeth Harvey, how old are you? 13, sir, and most folk call me Lizzie. Lizzie, he murmured, sounding my name so sweetly I hardly recognized him. Lizzie, Lizzie, Lizzie. To my surprise, his mouth turned down as if recalling something sad. Then he sighed and said more sternly, Lizzie, you must be very wicked to be brought here. You are very young to be transported. I kept my gaze on the ground. I would have liked to tell him that the judge who sentenced me to 7 years in Botany Bay did not think that I was too young. But it is said that the Old Bailey judges sup every night with the devil. He mused, perhaps you are better off in Sydney Cove. London is full of children crippled by those who should care for them. I nodded, not quite agreeing about things being so much better here. But Edward, in the 2 years I have lived in the city, I had seen such wickedness. Children apprenticed to men and women and used so cruelly. They would be crippled for the rest of their days. Others who would die of cold and starvation if it were not for what they managed to steal. I waited for Surgeon Russell to say what he had sent for me. He still seemed to be thinking out loud. Dean Jonathan Swift offers an interesting solution to dealing with unwanted children. What would that be, sir? I asked, hoping he would not mind me asking. Surgeon Russell cocked his head to one side. Why, in a tract he calls A Modest Proposal, he suggests that we farm our poorest children as meat. I stared at him with horror. Could these men be serious? The surgeon smiled grimly. I think this is mostly to bring the problem to our government's attention. Grave problems deserve grave answers. Recalling why I had been brought to him, he said briskly, You should know that I intend to ask Mr. Dodd to release you from his service. I need someone to care for Emily, and she must have someone with her night and day. My medical duties take me way too often. Also, he frowned a little, Winston tells me that you can read and write. If we stayed in Sydney Cove, Emily was to attend a school run by Isabella Rosson, a good woman, though she is a convict. While we were talking, a platoon of soldiers in grubby red coats and white trousers emerged from the barracks. They gradually moved into 2 lines. One soldier beat a drum. Another played a merry tune on a fife. The drill sergeant shouted, Left, right, left, right. Eyes, right. Soldiers marched up and down. Surgeon Russell's voice rose over the noise. While we are in Rose Hill, Emily must not neglect her lessons. I will ask you to read with her every day for 1 hour and to see that she practices her letters. Taking in my bewildered face, he nodded lightly and stalked back inside. I turned to Emily, who merely giggled. She popped me a curtsy and limped after her papa. They left me as gawky-eyed and amazed as poor Simple Sam himself. Eventually, I pulled myself together and returned to Sarah's kitchen. There, I repeated the conversation as well as I could remember it. To Sarah's credit, she made it seem as if she was delighted at my change of fortune. But I could see that she was upset at being separated from me. Never mind, Sarah, I cried. I will sleep with you every night. I doubt it, she said tartly. The surgeon won't want his daughter sleeping here. He'll expect you to stay with her night and day, won't he? I suppose you are right, I said wistfully. For this will be the first time in 2 years that we have been apart. But I will visit you every day, I promised. And though she growled that it would make little difference to her, and that she had far too much to do than to bother her with visitors, she seemed a little happier. Thursday, 22nd April. Uriah returned this morning to tell me to move my belongings to one of the larger family huts, about 100 yards down the track. Sarah watched my linsey-woolsey petticoat and my cotton shift, my 2 cotton stockings, and my woolen jacket. All are sadly frayed. Then, this quill, a bottle filled to the top with ink, and my most precious diary. These few possessions I stowed inside the raggedy sheet we used to dry ourselves on the other night. Sarah hated to see me go. At the last minute, she placed one of her own precious caps in my package, saying that mine was too shabby to be respectable. She reminded me how I must always keep away from places where men gather, and to be prudent where I went and with whom I spoke. She finished off with, "If you venture out of the hut after dusk by yourself, then surely you'll be sorry." I promised her to be extra careful now she was no longer around to protect me. We hugged and kissed, both weeping at being separated. I said that I would return as soon as I could, but she thought that I would have little time for visiting. Mindful of her warnings, I walked past the huts where the convict men live. They greeted me with the usual bad language and gestures. I gazed straight ahead and pretended to be deaf. When I reached the Russells' hut, both the surgeon and Emily were waiting to greet me. Surgeon Russell took me aside to say very gravely, "My daughter Emily suffers from a weak heart and extreme shortness of breath. She would die if she overexerts herself. It is your task to keep her as quiet as possible. You understand?" I told him that I did. Then, telling me that he had many duties to attend to, but he would be back before dusk, he hurried away. Emily showed her delight by constant chatter. She showed me all her clothes and her toys. She had managed to bring with her a wooden hobby horse and a cloth doll. That poor thing was sadly in need of stitching. I promised her that if she was good and learnt her lessons very quickly, that I would fix this doll and maybe sew her another. I can see that she is very excitable. Edward, it will be a great effort on my part to keep her as quiet as her papa insists. So far, things go well. The surgeon seems kind, if a little absent-minded. But when he is home, I keep out of his way. I must not do anything to irritate him. A convict's existence can only be so unfair. Long ago, I learned that a master has total power. Even if he is the gentlest of souls, he can make my life a misery. That's it for another day.